Nurses of psych wards, what did a patient do that left you speechless? Probably the saddest was a resident I had a long time ago. This gentleman was a World War II vet with Alzheimer's and dementia. Probably once or twice a month he would relive some battle he was in. He would literally run up the hallway and grab you and yell at you to get down behind the sandbags. He would then tell you take his Thompson. Because it was too heavy for him, he would just use his pistol. Then he would get up and run back down the hallway. This guy was old, and seeing him run full sprint like that up and down the hallway during one of his episodes was surreal. I can't imagine having to constantly relive the worst moments of your life where you witnessed and survived the unspeakable horrors of war. Not a nurse, but used to be a police officer. We got called to a psych ward where a guy was smashing up his room. Okay, fair enough. We got there, and the room was one where it had like plywood based furniture that was attached to the walls and floor. It had a solid door with an inch thick safety glass with wire in. He had ripped apart every bit of furniture apart from the bed with his bare hands, ripped the lights from the ceiling, ripped the sockets out of the walls. This is in the UK, so proper old brick and plaster walls, and had smashed a hole in the door window. He had absolutely no weapons in the room, and had done all this with his bare hands. I got there, and one of my colleagues was standing outside the door with a shield, and the patient was crashing into the door so hard that plaster dust was falling from the ceiling. He then managed to break through his window that led outside, also an inch thick, and got out onto the roof. They had to talk him down and eventually got him in, and a load of us escorted him to a room filled with only furniture and made from foam and padding, and the doctor gave him a powerful sedative and then quickly backed out the door whilst waiting for it to work. They took him to a psychiatric intensive care unit. I'll never forget the amount of damage he did. The room was sprayed with blood and looked like he'd smashed it up with a sledgehammer. He had only used his bare hands and the shitty furniture. That insane thing was he was about 5 feet 6 maximum and looked about 140 pounds maximum. He was a small man, but his psychotic break gave him insane superhuman strength. A nurse told me one of her patients killed himself on the unit while on 1:1 suicide watch. Edit. Patient and staff were at arm's length and patient suddenly charged the wall, smashing his head as hard as he could, breaking his neck in the process. Not a nurse, pharmacist. Had one of our clozapine patients miss a monthly meeting to discuss their medication. Called around, found out she was in the ICU having eaten 2 of her own fingers, then visited her mother for coffee, still bleeding. Had a friend tell me of another patient, made a cut in his thigh and reopened it regularly until the whole thing was a scar tissue cavern, by some miracle avoiding infection. Started using his meat pocket to hold pens and coins and anything he could collect in his ward. Nobody knew until a paperclip pierced the side and he finally wound up with an infection that took him to ICU, where they found his stash. I watched a guy try to remove rats from his rectum. Stated that his ex-girlfriend summoned them there. He ended up tearing his rectal walls to shreds. I really don't know how a human can change from normal, having a GF and such, to what you described. This guy had multiple issues and ultimately had to be restrained and sedated. He was transferred from prison to state hospital. One of our patients escaped the ward and managed to hitchhike all the way to Sydney, about 900 kilometers. My grandmother worked in a nursing home years back. I remember driving with her the next town over and seeing one of the patients walking down the street in hospital gown that escaped. It is amazing how much energy a 80-year-old dementia patient has. We would put the patient in the car and drive him back to the nursing home. We had a geropsych floor. Crazy old people. One night while passing through, a little old lady popped her head out her doorway and said to me, "I could sure use the company of a good-looking young man tonight. Sorry, I'm not that good looking." Quick as snot on a doorknob, she said, "That's okay. I can't see too well." I didn't join her, but her charisma was on point. Not a nurse, but I used to be a security guard in a hospital, and we had a patient who self-harmed and cut a hole into themselves around their belly button, and then stuck a bunch of paper clips and buttons and things like that into it. I'm a tech at a psych hospital, but I start nursing school in August, so I hope this counts. We had a very tall, heavyset man who swung at a nurse and a fellow tech when they asked him to not stand naked in the door and flash the whole unit, so we put him in a halt and escorted him to the seclusion room. From there he tried to strangle himself with his underwear. He had them on his head like a bandana, so we opened the door and took those away. Then he peed all over the floor, did push-ups, and every time he came down he would slurp it up. Eventually he got bored of that and began writing on the wall in his pee, and then masturbated onto the door and said it would be better if he could fuck my dead corpse. Eventually his MB52 kicked in and he contacted for safety/good behavior, so we opened the door again and he bit me on the hand and drew blood. From there I got permission to not be involved in the code and a peer swapped me out. I'm assaulted on a weekly basis and we aren't even an acute care facility. I'm very excited to go PRN in August. $15.38/HR is not worth it. 60-something old woman would come out of her room every so often at night topless and holding out her saggy breasts saying in broken English, "My nipples, my nipples please, for the children." 40-something woman would sneak the shower mat out of the bathroom to put under her bed because she was God and we were stealing her power by electrocuting her vagina every night. The floor mat apparently stopped this from happening. A severely schizophrenic woman used to tell me that my name was the worst fairy tale lie that she ever wrote in the 2 Bibles for her daddy. When she was angry with me, she would yell at me and say, "Get out of here, fairy tale book. I wish I never wrote you." That same woman attacked some nursing students who were attempting to use tissues over lollipops to make ghost props for Halloween. She didn't seem to like this, and while trying to hit them was yelling, "You idiots, you can't make ghosts out of lollipops." Again, same woman but different group of nursing students brought in several pizzas for an end of semester party. The woman then walked up and down the tables looking at the pizzas. Then out of nowhere she started throwing the pizza and yelling, "What's this supposed to be? Some kind of pizza test?" I'm an RN in Boston in a psych hospital and I've seen some shit. One of the things I'll never ever forget was we had this manic guy THST had been transferred from another unit cause he kept getting in fights over there and all the other patients were trying to attack him. I was still working nights back then, and at about 3 AM he came up to me and said his tooth hurt and he needed to see a dentist right away. I said I don't have a dentist for him to see, but when the doctor comes in the morning we can take a look. Gave him some Tylenol and sent him back to bed. About 5 minutes later he came out saying it really hurt and he needed to see a dentist to pull his tooth. Again I told him there's no dentist, but maybe I can get some more pain meds. In the middle of me explaining this to him, he sticks his hand in his mouth and rips his molar out of his head and handed it to me. Blood starts pouring out of his mouth, but he didn't even seem to notice. After I clean him up and get the bleeding to stop and call the doctor to get him some Ativan, he goes, "Make sure you give me that tooth back when I leave. That's my tooth, don't try and steal it." F***ing wild shit. I saw a crazy bipolar woman bring a man out of full catatonia with a blowjob. This was years ago. Security wasn't as tight as these days. Somehow this extremely manic woman gets into this guy's room. Now the guy, let's call him Gary. Gary has been full catatonic since we got him. Couldn't care for himself at all. He would just stare all day long. Well, I guess she must have sucked the depression right out of the guy, because he was right as rain afterward. We found them at the end of the session. Got assigned to child psych ward in a hospital where I worked. Easy gig, wear street clothes, not much to do, but pass out meds and observe 15-year-old black kid, overweight, is sitting beside me casually discussing his day when he jumps up, begins screaming like a banshee, flailing around, looks like a seizure on roids. And I'm befuddled as to how to control him or the situation when after a few minutes of twisting my nerves into a tight ball, he stops, sits back down, and begins talking casually again. Had one of his spells. Not sure if anyone has ever been that close to a raving maniac while he's having a fit, but it's disarming to say the least. We had a psych patient on our floor that wasn't really crazy, just really confused and unpleasant in general. One night I was mixing his drink with some thickener, and per usual he started yelling about me poisoning him. I explained what it was, and that we are all here to help him, not hurt him, and he responds with, "I'm just going to die." His vitals were fine, he was alert, no red flags, and like I said, he was always pretty unpleasant, so I didn't think much of it. Sure as shit, he coded an hour later, and we never got him back. I was a tech at 3 different psych wards. I could tell you stories for days. But you asked what a patient did that left me speechless, so here's speechless. Despite being a psychiatric center, occasionally we'd get a medication management intake, which was basically someone with intellectual impairment, politically correct term for mentally retarded, who needed a safe place to transition through a change in their medication. Our newest patient was severely intellectually impaired. He was unable to communicate verbally, didn't hear very well, and also had severe visual impairment. His was one of the most severe cases I'd seen. Anyway, one of the things he did constantly was cross one arm across his waist, stick the fingers of his other hand into his mouth, and rock aggressively forward and backwards while standing. And he'd sucked his fingers so frequently that it had affected his teeth, and with such duration, that his arm was always glazed in saliva, which would froth up at the elbow and just sort of dangle there waiting for enough rocking to send it flying to the floor. This guy had spent his entire life in institutions, and he was about 18 or so when we got him. So it goes without saying that thumb-sucking liquid preventatives had all been tried on him, but our charge nurse went ahead and wasted her time attempting it. The truth of the matter from my perspective was he wasn't harming anyone and had very few comforts other than standing there rocking and sucking his thumb, so why make the poor guy's day any harder? Alas, he kept on slurping, even with his hand doused in that nasty stuff. Brace yourself. So he was on one-on-one observation during his time with us, which meant a staff member had to follow him around. Pretty easy since he just stood there rocking and keep him safe 24/7. But you were allowed to give the one-on-ones a little bit of privacy under certain conditions, if they had to use the bathroom. For this guy we actually put him on the toilet, so he could use the bathroom, and you guessed it, that meant cleaning him up. Oh, and I was his one-on-one that shift. Lucky me. Given his condition, it was okay to let him have moderate privacy, which entailed me standing by his bathroom door and the door being open just a crack. If it sounded like anything other than pissing or shitting was happening in there, I was only a few feet away. So I'm doing the mental math for how long I think a #2 takes, and I'm timing the process. Okay, now I can smell shit, so that means he's started. Another few minutes, and I'll peek in to see he's eating all of his shit. Completely hand over fist, shoving it in his mouth. Smeared on his clothes, arm, hands, the toilet seat. I told the charge nurse later, pretty sure I know why he didn't mind the taste of the thumb sucker stuff. Anyway, I have other stories. A close runner-up to most perplexing was the patient who was in the quiet room/timeout room, think padded room, naked because he'd torn his clothing up, and we confiscated it, and he refused to put on the tear-proof clothing we offered. Anyway, he peeled off his fingernails and shoved them in his urethra and had to receive medical assistance removing them. Pharmacist here. Had a patient getting discharged from the ER when they found out 2 police officers were waiting outside to take them in on an outstanding warrant. Patient grabbed the doctor's coffee mug, smashed it on a desk, and then tried to slit their own throat with the broken mug. Caused lacerations needing stitches, but luckily nothing serious. Oh my goodness. I'm a PCT at a mental facility. I have so many stories. Once, we had to put a guy in seclusion, and there is a small inset window to observe them through when in seclusion, and they are on constant observation. The man we put in seclusion was psychotic and targeting me. He stripped naked, violently masturbated towards me staring through the window, then spreads his cheeks and presses his entire asshole against the inset window. It was impressive. I have seen into the all-seeing eye. Had a patient once get a picture off the wall. I don't know how they are bolted to a brick wall and run down the hallway screaming I'm a cat burglar. I'm the Joker. Another patient abruptly stood up and gave chase screaming I'm Batman, bitch. Once had a patient shit in his sink because his bathroom door was locked. Someone was on their way to unlock his door, but since it wasn't immediate, he proceeded to shit in his sink. I was doing room checks and saw a pair of legs with pants at their ankles hanging off the edge of the sink. I'll try to add more as I remember lol. Thanks for watching. What is your speakless story? Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe.